don't have it in my phone.
One item agenda, yeah.
I don't have the agenda.
All right. Hello, hey guys, how are you?
Please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Beautiful, we'll call it summer day. I'm assuming nobody to speak to us. Okay, thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes at the following meetings, April 3rd, May 6th, May 10th, May 11th, May 22nd, May 23rd, and May 24th, please?
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Those are approved. Can I get a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. We have no conflicts to talk about today. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda 8A through D?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. That is approved. And then we have two reports of the president tonight. I'm going to start with you, Rich. Awesome.
President Ryder, members of the board, Rich Clune, Finance and Operations at Southeast Tech. You know, Bob stole my thunder with the flowers. I thought this was going to be a memorial presentation, but this is the 20th budget that I have presented. So 20 down, 20 to go.
Yes.
Just kidding. Just a couple general comments to get started. And you're aware of this, and you probably heard me drone on about this a few times, but our presentation, we're looking at a special revenue fund, which is the post-secondary fund. That's where most of our activities are recorded. Then we have 3 enterprise funds that we'll be presenting, and those are, in accounting parlance, is business type activities. So that's the bookstore, childcare, and food service. The executive summary, I think I have 26 pages, so at 10 minutes a page, we should be out of here by 8:30 or so. I'll try to hit the high points in what's going on in here. Obviously, this is the tentative adoption and is the public hearing for that component of it. And I think I'll just start, kind of focus on a couple major things in the executive summary that jump off the page. When you look on the second one and when you look at the enrollments in the different career clusters, you see quite a bit of growth in the health programs, not a surprise. Especially with the media and the expansion of the simulation center, not unusual. But I think what's a salient point on this, which is something that we've seen repeat itself quite frequently, is there's a lot of variability in year to year. So what you might see up this year in those clusters might have been down last year. And it would be really great if we were all up every single year. But there tends to be movement, and probably not unusual in the environment that we're in, and students make their choices as they get to that point. Second thing I wanted to point out in the executive summary is on the fee structure. As part of the legislative appropriation, you'll hear me speak to this. We received 4% to our PSA. We also received some dollars in support of salary enhancement for across the campus, as long as we agreed at our level to provide a 4% increase. The caveat to that was to freeze and hold fees, both tuition that the State Board of Tech Ed adopts, and then at the local level that you all have authority to. So that this budget reflects that. The only change is in the dual credit rate, and that's a state mandated component to it. So that's going up just a little bit, $2.51 a credit. What happens with that, and it'll have a little bit of an impact to us, in the sense that the state always provides funding in support of that. And what it used to do in the past was bring us up so we were whole on tuition. So the state would, when it was 48.33, the state would buy 96.67, and then we would keep $124. We'd remit $21 to the state for the facility fee, which is the bonded debt for our facilities. They finally caught us on that, I think. And it was not us. It was, obviously, we were directed by the state to do this. But the Health and Education Facility Authority, feels they should be whole. So they are going to, of the amounts that we get from the state, they want the $36 first, where that had been the secondary component. So we won't be whole in our tuition rate of $124. I think it winds up being about $8 differential. So probably has a $12,000 to $15,000 impact. Not a huge thing, but just an awareness. And I think the state, Department of Ed and Board of Tech Ed and their folks are still kind of working through what that all looks like. A couple employment changes. You saw there's an addition of 4 employees. That's not the limit of the requests. The requests were quite a bit higher. This tentative budget does not include any of those requests for new FTEs. And of those that are there, most of them were mid-year hires, so they were already in place. So once the simulation center came online, we needed to add a couple custodians. We had a contracted employee in the DMS program that retired. We brought that in-house as an employee, and then the growth in the medical coding program required a position as well. So, and then the new one we're adding that is an addition is the student counselor. Right now that's under a professional services contract. We're just bringing that individual in-house and making them an employee. So again, not a huge fiscal impact to us. You want to flip over to just Exhibit 1. Scroll down here for my paid viewing audience here. A couple things to note on there is you see in the post-secondary fund, you see a use of cash. So this is not unusual for us at this point. Still trying to, sharpen the point on the pencil and reduce that. So this is to just move to the next step. We'll all go back and see if we can bring that down. There is some, argument with justification to maybe utilize a portion of the existing cash for what could be viewed as one-time expenditures. So kind of jumping ahead in that aspect of it, the state in their funding provided equipment funding for us again this year in the FY25 budget, but it requires a local match of 33%. Why that's significant is in the prior budget in the FY24, that funding wasn't there. So it had been there the year before, but not last year. So when that happens, that match that we had went away in the 24 budget because we were funded with equipment in GOED, and that didn't require the program match. So is this ongoing or is it kind of one time? I kind of thinking that if we can, as we go back and review this, to try to address that structural deficit and bring this into balance. But if we can't quite get there, we've done this in the past as well. We find it along the way, or we just make a conscious decision to utilize existing cash. So when we get to the final adoption, we'll have a better sense of where we think we're going to end up in the end of FY24. We did have some funds come in during FY24 through the HERF funds. We claimed some lost revenues that is from years past that we brought into this year and recognized this year. So there is a funding mechanism even if we were to go with one-time funds. We're not necessarily dipping into cash coming from our operating aspects, but there was a source for that. Food service and Scarborough Center are both utilizing some existing cash and also require some subsidies from the post-secondary fund. Food service, we're trying to maintain a affordable price for students, and as a result of that, we're not charging market prices if you were to go to a fast food restaurant compared to what students potentially could pay. There is some differential, and I think that's reflected in some of those revenue streams. And then obviously we only have a 9-month where we have the bulk of our students, and really it's probably 8 months when you factor in the holiday weekend. So you see that in the expenditure size on that Exhibit 1 as well, where you're seeing the transfers out. So that's an increase over the prior year. Some of that has to do with the fact that we are restoring that in the child care fund. We had been the recipient of some various state funds, pass-through federal funds to support child care. I think you heard a lot of the media presentation about that and those funds and the challenges with employees. So I think in mid-24 or maybe even mid-23, we had made adjustment to our salary schedule to provide a more attractive recruiting incentive. Obviously that has a cost. So there's going to be, we were able to fill that differential with those federal funds. Those are now going away. So we're going to have to step in and subsidize that with post-secondary funds. And again, as we get closer to the end of the year, that's a potential area where we could look at to maybe reduce, try to narrow that gap in post-secondary fund as well. We flip over to Exhibit 2, the next page. This gives you that year-to-year comparison when we're looking at our revenue streams. So you see tuition and fees are up. That's predominantly in enrollment. You'll see that on another page. So enrollment in the post-secondary fund, roughly 3%, and that's budget to budget, not necessarily actual to budget. Or 24 projection. So it's a budget to budget adjustment. The other local sources that had to do with the donations that came from the health systems and why you see a decline there. There was $4.5 million received, so those have dropped. I think the positive to that, even though it's a decline of 3.8 million, if all things being static, you would have seen that reduction of 4.5 million. So it's showing that there's still additional support coming in that Stephen, through the foundation, is able to raise and support for us. The state reimbursement has to do with the per student allocation, increasing that 4%. Some of the state funds that are coming in as well for the equipment. Other state revenue, similar, that's related to the simulation center where the state had provided that $4.5 million in equipment. There may be some carryover in the FY25. This tentative doesn't reflect that, but there's a offset. There's a revenue and an expenditure tied to it. I think they're still ordering some things. There's still some things to come in. So we'll probably wind up reprogramming those dollars once we get to the final adoption. You'll see the same thing in GoEd. Struggled a little bit to get the contract signed, so we were holding off spending that $1 million until we knew for sure we were going to be reimbursed for it. So we were a little late in getting started on that. That funding has been extended through the end of the calendar year, so there may be some reprogramming of that too. Again, once we get to the final adoption, we'll kind of know where we're at in FY24 and what amounts I need to program for it. The other federal revenue that you see declining really has to do, again, with the federal support related to the corona. So this is at the end of it. We, between the student allocations and what was available to us as an institutional, we drew down everything but about $1,700. So we made use of it in the mechanisms that we could through equipment purchases, but also there was some lost revenue that we were able to pick up and justify for it. So that's why it's coming in at the end. One of the conditions was they wanted you to use some comparatives. So you kind of needed to see where you were to where you are at now, and you could kind of justify some of that lost revenue component. Bookstore fund, that increase in revenues is just related to sales, obviously sales of textbooks. Things have changed in that market a little bit. Used to be used textbooks was kind of a hot commodity. Publishers have made sure that's gone away through either access codes, bundling types of things. So they've really put a hurt on the used textbook market. So obviously we have more students too. So more equipment, more toolkits. We're seeing some of that come up. Food service and child care funds, you see the increase in subsidy there that I already spoke to. Just some moderate increases that we're planning for food service based on utilization. There'll be a fee structure increase in food service, but we're not trying to go way out of bounds on this. Trying to pick up a little bit as we move forward. Feel that falls outside of the freeze because this isn't directly related to educational attainment. These are the services that we provide. Get to Exhibit 3. A lot of numbers, a lot of movement. These are all the various programs that exist. In the areas where you're seeing the large increases, the large difference from the prior year, this is really related to that equipment and what I spoke to. So in FY24, the state funding for equipment was in GoEd. We consolidate that and house that in a separate cost center, and that's just state accounting manual requirements, and we record that. The state funding, when it's a local and a state match, those expenditures drop into the program area. So this is where the post-secondary fund's a little bit different than what you see on the K-12 side. We don't have a capital outlay fund, so that those capital expenditures, both in equipment and expenditures, are reflected in the program budgets. And the majority of the increases, again, are all related to equipment. I'll just pick out a couple of the other highlighted here. Administration, that's going to be up just because of the transfers, some anticipated postage increase. Get into the business office, we made an adjustment on bad debt and bumped that up a little bit. Cardiac ultrasound and some of the health programs, we're seeing some increase and push in the repair and maintenance area. Some of that has to do with the warranty or extended service agreements. That's probably an area we can look at. In part of it, it's just some accounting magic that I can do, depending upon when they need to purchase that. So if it's towards the end of 25, we don't need to recognize the whole year's worth of the cost of that. We only need to recognize 2 months. So I think we may be able to back up some of those costs in the repair and maintenance. Emergency management, you see that big drop in there. That's those HERF funds, that's $600,000. You see the GoEd equipment funding, that dropping substantially. Again, that's related to the way that the state funding is coming through, just in the way that they handle their funds. Flipped over to the next page. Again, I'm just seeing predominantly equipment in my notes here. If there's something that jumps off the page to you, certainly can answer the questions. Operational services, looks like the guy that oversees that's kind of a spendthrift. But really that's in part reflected to the staff increases that came with the addition in the simulation center coming online. Obviously more square footage, there's going to be more supplies utilized. There's going to be more utilities associated with that. There's also a pretty significant equipment allocation in there. We're getting end of life in some of our pieces, and we've seen our maintenance costs jump up, so we may need to look at replacing them. But again, that's another area that we could potentially look at when we go to narrow that $900,000 down. Pharmacy program ended, so we taught that out, so that comes off the table, so to speak. Testing center, more resources in terms of proctoring and providing testing site opportunities for students. I think you see that in the peer tutoring group as well. There's some additional resources invested in that. But the rest of them are equipment. So when you see those big moves, that's equipment related. Next page, Exhibit 4. The increase, obviously, in the bookstore is related to if sales are going up, our cost of buying the products that we're going to resell would be going up as well. Food service, again, cost of materials and just cost of operations. Same thing on the child care center. Again, nothing major in there. The next couple pages are just the notice that'll appear. It has appeared, it will appear in the public notice in August. So it's just a different way. These documents tend to have a redundancy to them. There's just different ways of looking at the same set of numbers. So the document that's before you on the screen, this really boils things down in the way that we report in a fiscal reporting at the end of the fiscal year, and the audit report rolls up in this manner, and it's by those program clusters and those program areas. So again, just another way of looking at it. The detail is more when you get in those prior pages in the cost centers. Next page after that is a couple documents. This is Exhibit 6 and Exhibit 6A. Provides a little greater delineation, and this is in the format of what you see each month in the VP reports that get submitted. And again, lays prior year budget with the proposed tentative budget this year. I think we talked about the revenue changes in terms of what's happening with the state and local fees. This aggregates the expenditures by category. So when you look at it rather than program area, when you look at the salaries, you see that going up. Part of that's the new positions that are there. Part of it's the 4% salary increase. Part of it is allowing for step advancements for various staff. So we're not holding the line on steps, and we're funding that internally with our own resources. Benefits, retirement benefits, you would expect to see them move as your salaries go up. Insurance benefits kind of held the line on the health insurance. One of the things that's different this year is we are more static, we're more finalized in our available positions and our turnover, so we kind of know who's going to be out there next year. So whenever there's a vacancy or a known vacancy, when I go to build the budget and program it, I always assume the maximum exposure in terms of what are they going to enroll in. So knowing our employees and their current enrollments, not to say it couldn't change, but we were able to narrow that down and saved a little bit in our budget development. Professional services, that reduction is really related to the A&E, architectural engineering fees associated with the simulation center. So that construction project, we're just winding down the final few payments, so we won't have that level of fees going into next year. The repair and maintenance, we talked about that in terms of the service contracts that are out there. that are happening, so that's why that's going up. Those warranties are placed under that. Supplies and material, that's kind of spread across the board in terms of classroom supplies, some of the custodial supplies that we're using. There's some computer equipment in some of our programs that don't rise to that capital threshold in our accounting things, so they fall into the supplies category. So there's quite a bit related to our networking program that's programmed, networking instructional program that's programmed into the budget as well. And then again, I talked about the bad debt. So those are kind of the highlights of the operating expenses. The buildings and buildings improvements, the CIP, as you want to call it, the amounts that are there are placeholder amounts. That remains a work in progress. I think there's probably been some discussion before you about the housing and urban development grant that's coming forward. That's going to be touching a lot of the Ed Wood building. So causes us to take a step back and say, how do we want to program those dollars and how can we capitalize on the use of those federal dollars and do things with our local dollars. So we're going to be reevaluating. We started early on and now we're kind of going to retrench and look at that again. The equipment, that's maybe some flux and just in particular areas, the state funding, the 33.67% match, that was identified, that's programmed as such. What happens in the Perkins funding and our capital plan, there may be some movements within programs once all the academic folks kind of sit down and finalize, no, we need this piece more than this piece. So we'll do some updating in that, but I don't anticipate significant dollar changes in there. Like I said, it's a placeholder. We're staying within the money that we can generate from students for capital improvements and the funds that we receive from the state. So we're not trying to step outside of that. And again, you see the 966 there in terms of cash that's being utilized for now at least. And again, we may be making some adjustments. So the FY24 called for a use of existing cash of about $125,000. I don't want to predict at this point because usually as soon as I do that, I'm wrong. But I think we're going to come in better than that. We should perform better, and that may be a source of funding into that one-time money. The page that's behind it, in what we all like to call Todd font, is very small print, but it's in effect the same thing as the previous page, just provides a little additional breakdown, a little more detail for you to review and take a look at and see if there's anything that stands out to you there. But again, I think we've touched base on all the different categories. The page after that, Exhibit 6B, is a summary of the various capital allocations. We try to do a 5-year lookout in terms of our capital equipment. Obviously, things don't break when we want them to break or don't reach obsolescence. So this is an ongoing process that's reviewed every year, and that's where I think you'll see some maybe movement in those various programs, but not necessarily the overall dollar amount once we get to that. Exhibit 6C is the capital improvement plan as it was adopted last year. We'll go in for the final adoption. We'll update with what we've expended so far, where there's some variances, and we'll fine tune and greater delineation on the projects that we're planning on taking on in the next fiscal year. So that'll be coming in the final adoption. Exhibit 7, 8, and 9 are the enterprise funds. Obviously, there's not quite as much to look at there. Not a lot of activity in terms of various accounts. It tends to aggregate at a higher level. Supplies and materials in the books are already talked about. We're going to be reselling more stuff. A few more resources provided in terms of other hourly support. That's kind of the highlights of the book service fund. Child care fund, just a food, excuse me, I'm out of sync here. Food service fund, a little bit of an increase in the transfer in, and that's really accounting for the overall revenue growth. So we're bumping that up from 85 to 100. Food service fund, we've been running a structural deficit for these actual deficit for all these years, but what's happened now, we've kind of fully depreciated out, and the equity that's in that is about gone. So from an accounting standpoint, you can't end with a negative balance, so we're going to need to start subsidizing that. So not unusual, not necessarily unplanned for, kind of knew that was coming, and I think we finally reached that point in this timeline. And again, on the child care fund, we implemented that $100,000. We're proposing $100,000 transfer from the post-secondary fund, just because the federal funds have gone away, no longer available. Obviously, we have some increased labor costs because of the salary adjustments we made a few years back just to attract candidates, and we have seen a benefit from that. So we are fully staffed with full-time employees. Prior to that change, we were running a lot of stuff with part-time employees. So we are fully staffed with child care funds. So that's the 30-minute review or 25-minute review of what we're proposing as a tentative adoption for you all to act on, and then stand by for any questions that anybody may have.
At this point, I'll open the public hearing.
These are all paid attendees.
Yes. And I will close the public hearing. Didn't hear any feedback, obviously. Does anybody have any questions? No? Like you said, this is a tentative. We'll final adopt it in the July meeting, correct?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So
Yeah.
Things can change, numbers can move between now and then.
Yeah,
So
and-
we'll.
Yeah,
see that.
obviously, we'll look to address that structural deficit in the post-secondary fund. So that'll be those folks behind me charge over the next few weeks to, let's go back and look. I think one positive that comes out of it, it's not unusual for us to end at this point, but this is actually the starting point. What typically happens is we come in and we tend to be, that 900,000 tends to be a couple million, and we start to squeeze and work on it. So the growth in enrollment, the additional state support has left us in a better spot to start. Now, with the increased enrollment, obviously comes increased demand for services and utilization of resources. So, there's still going to be some work to do to get it to where we need it to be. But we'll come back with that, with the tentative and all the other things that happen with that annual meeting moving forward.
All right. Can I get a motion in a second to adopt the tentative FY25 budget based upon current assumptions and authorize the recruitment to proposed new positions?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. That is tentatively passed.
Thank you.
Are you doing the salary schedule?
Yeah,
for these two?
yeah,
Okay,
same thing. This flows from that budget that was just reflected. So
Okay, go ahead.
the dollars and the salary amounts that are reflected in there are those schedules that are before you for the FY25 salary schedules. And those are reflecting just a 4% across the board increase in every lane and step. And in the executive summary, I mentioned in there that the state says don't raise your fees, we'll provide additional funding, but they don't provide funding to the full exposure. So you can see we are anticipating about $400,000 coming from it. By the time you add in the lanes and the steps and the additional benefit costs, our exposure is probably in that $700,000 range in doing that, and then the additional amount that's reflected in those positions. But again, the salary is in keeping with what we agreed upon at the state level to receive that additional funding, and does reflect a 4% increase, in which every full-time employee that's out there will, at a minimum, receive 4%. Some will receive more just because they're advancing on that schedule in their steps.
All right. Sounds good. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the FY25 Southeast Tech salary schedules, please?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That is approved. Anything else to come before the board? No? All right. If not, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.